Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History Valley podcast. And tonight I'm joined by Kidron. He's the host of the Biblical Proportions podcast. I'll link to it in the description below and also to his Patreon page. And that being said, Gil, thank you for joining me tonight.
Hey, Jacob. Thank you for having me. Always happy to be here.
So tonight we're talking about the book of Deuteronomy and the 2nd century BCE. So what exactly is happening in the 2nd century BCE that involved the 5th book of Moses?
Yeah, I think that Deuteronomy might be underappreciated. I think it might be the most important book in the Bible, right? And just to refresh people's memories. It's the 5th book of the Bible. It closes up the Torah series, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of Moses. And I think it was written, as you said, in the 2nd century BCE, and specifically in 140 BCE, which is basically when scholars say that a lot of things radically changed in the middle of the 2nd century BCE, they basically mean 140 BCE, when the Hebrews gained their independence in the Hebrew land, under the Maccabees. And then everything radically changed. And I'm gonna name drop Dr. Jonathan Adler, the archaeologist, whom you had on the show many times, because basically everything that he says about 140 BCE works fantastically well with Deuteronomy. They are two peas in a pot. They are two sides of the same coin. And in Deuteronomy, basically the Hebrews, like the plot of Deuteronomy, the Hebrews are outside the land. Moses is speaking to them, gives them their laws, and then he dies, right? And after that, they finally inherit their land, right? They left Egypt like 3 books ago, walking around and stuff. Now they're about to get in. And Deuteronomy is like the final covenant between the Hebrew people and their God Yahweh. Okay, they have the rules, not rules for being anywhere else other than their land. These are rules for their land when they control their land. And they have a new theology through Deuteronomy, and like it details how the relationship between the people and their God should be. And it's like very, very strict on banning, very detailed also on banning statue worshipping forever inside the Hebrew land and for Hebrews in general. So I think the Deuteronomy is huge, and it's also very, very important for academia, like in scholarly circles, because academics, most of them agree that it was written in 622 BCE, right? Not Maccabean times, 140 BCE, 622 BCE. There's like a huge reform under the King Josiah, a book found in the temple and all of that. We'll get into that in a moment. And scholars say that the people who wrote Deuteronomy, that's like a separate source, quote unquote, the source that is unrelated to the writers of the previous 4 books. And basically, like the Deuteronomists, they take over the Bible in Deuteronomy and for the next coming books, because then it gets to what scholars call the Deuteronomic historian, Deuteronomic editors. And they think that the code of laws of Deuteronomy was found in the temple in 622 BCE. And I think this is not correct at all. I think it's Maccabean. It's from 140 BCE. And that's what we'll discuss. So far, so good. Any questions, or I'll just plow ahead?
So my question is, do you have any idea who wrote the book of Deuteronomy and why it was written? What makes you suspect it was written exactly on the year you said it was written?
Yes. So once we look at the world of 140 BC in detail, which we'll do in this conversation, and we put it up against Deuteronomy, what's inside Deuteronomy, we'll see that they are one of the same. They're talking about the exact same things. And once we look into Dr. Adler's work and everything that he found that's going on in 140 BCE, and we put that with Deuteronomy, it's just exactly the same. Just, we can use like Adler's work, that's archaeology, way less open to interpretation. You either find stuff or you don't find stuff. We can use that as like a starting point and the boundaries of what happened. So I'll just recap the things that Dr. Adler says that really changed in 140 BCE, just like that, radically. Okay, one thing is that the knowledge of the biblical stories spread really quickly in 140 BC and beyond. Before that, very few people knew about Moses and what happened. And after that, everybody knows about that. Passover, he says, as we know it, begins in 140 BC. Everybody starts celebrating it where they live, whereas before 140 BC, we don't see evidence for that. Yom Kippur, he says, begins in 140 BC. I think that Deuteronomy was written for the Yom Kippur of 140 BC. I'll get into all the details. I'm now working, on the 5th season of my podcast. I go book by book. So I will get into all the details on the podcast, right? I won't just dump on everybody like all the minutia. But once you get into the minutia, you see that everything is right there. So we have, everybody learns the stories now. Everybody celebrates Passover. The holiest day of the Hebrew calendar, Yom Kippur, suddenly appears. Shabbat suddenly becomes a thing. No more statues starting in 140 BC. I heard Dr. Adler say that on your channel. You asked him, when did the Hebrews stop worshipping statues? He said 140 BC, mid 2nd century BC, after the rise of the Maccabean state. Suddenly, no more statues. The temple starts to slide in terms of importance. Before that, everything was centralized in the temple. You couldn't worship by yourself, do stuff by yourself. After 140 BC, we see people, it's decentralized. We see people worshiping Yahweh everywhere. And he even says, right, in his articles that you can date the beginning of Judaism to 140 BC, Judaism as we know it. And once you look at Adler's work and you read Deuteronomy, you see there are two sides of the same coin. They complete and complement each other. So in 140 BC, to sum up, we have euphoric national Hebrew independence on the Hebrew land. That's very important, on the Hebrew land. And now people own their lands because they kicked out the foreigners, the foreign Seleucid Empire, huge empire. Like Judea, I don't know if it's even like 1% of the size of the Seleucid Empire. Much stronger foe. They kicked them out. They kicked out the priests, idol-worshipping priests. Okay, no more statues on the land. Hebrews stopped in 140 BC. They stopped worshipping statues. Till today. Now it's no longer a problem for Hebrews to not worship statues. But up to 140 BC, that was a problem. Couldn't kick out the habit. Excuse me. After 140 BC, no longer a problem. There's a new theology, a new style of religion, right? Adler says it's like the birth of Judaism. There's a new, more personal relationship with God. Also, biblical commentary becomes a thing around that time, around the Pharisees. With the Pharisees, that's like the big populist political movement of the time. And Pharisees, Perushim in Hebrew, it comes from Perushim, to interpret. They begin to interpret the Bible. They read the Bible, in groups, and okay, this is what the stories mean. Before that, it wasn't a thing when we discuss, this story actually means that. When you apply it to what's going on in your time, which is what we do today, biblical commentary, that became a thing in 140 BCE. The lands are redistributed, right? Because not only foreigners, a lot of foreigners are kicked out, a lot of priests are kicked out. So there's a land redistribution, a new populist constitution, a new independent justice system. There's a charismatic leader who's a great speaker, Shimon Tassi. He's very optimistic. And he's led his people all the way to this amazing moment when they gain independence in 140 BCE. But sadly, he would not live long enough to see the fruits of his labor, because he would be assassinated not long after that. And if we keep all of this in mind, what I just mentioned again, and we put it up against Deuteronomy, we see that they are one of the same, the exact same thing. Deuteronomy is Maccabean, and it was written for the Hebrew independence and the radical reform of the religion, as is attested in archaeology in Dr. Adler's work in 140 BCE. And so let's just again go over now like the exact similarities. So Deuteronomy itself is a book about a euphorical national independence on the Hebrew land. This, you read Deuteronomy, this is what Deuteronomy is about. You are about to get into your land and be independent. You kicked out this very day, it says, the much stronger foreign foe that ruled your land. This very day, it says that several times. Okay, it's not true if you read Deuteronomy as if it chronicles, the Hebrews returning from Egypt, because nothing was given to them this very day when everything is read in Deuteronomy. No, there are a lot. Some more stuff will happen. It will take time until they get in and then conquer this and that. Nothing is happening this very day at this moment. And again, so both Deuteronomy 140 BCE, no more statues, worshiping your land, new theology, new covenant, the same kind of theology and covenant. Biblical commentary becomes a thing only in Maccabean times. Deuteronomy has biblical commentary inside the Bible. It recaps the past stories of the 4 books, including stuff that happened, just a while back, just like a short while earlier. And Moses is telling the people, hey, do you remember what happened in the desert just now? This is what happened. And he casts it in a new light, reinterprets it. It's not like my opinion of it. It's like accepted that this is what it does. Biblical commentary was not invented before 140 BC. And I think that it should raise a lot of flags that we have biblical commentary inside the Bible, right? This is like something that we should note. Up to Deuteronomy, we have stories. And now Moses is like, oh, do you remember this? Oh, do you remember that? It's like a minister or a rabbi, whatever, or a priest in a church or a shul, a synagogue, talking about the biblical story and applying it to what's going on in their time. We do this till today. For 2,000 years, people have been doing it. But this is going on inside the Bible. Okay, it changes the plot and the emphasis of stories that we just went over. And again, both of them talk about, Deuteronomy talks about, you now kicked out a much stronger foe. You will now get your lands that you didn't buy, homes that you didn't build, fields that you didn't sow. You will now get them. This is not true for Deuteronomy. This is true, like if you follow the plot of Deuteronomy when they're in the desert. But if this is 140 BC, this is exactly what happened. They kicked out the much stronger foe, and now they're about to get into their land. Maccabees established a new constitution. That's like a new covenant. Deuteronomy is the book of the covenant. Deuteronomy talks about a new and independent justice system, okay, that happened in 140 BC. It didn't happen before 140 BC, okay? And both of the books have a charismatic leader, a great speaker, who led these people all the way to the promised land, but did not live to see the fruits of his labor. So, and also, another thing that Deuteronomy does, when it recaps the stories and reinterprets them, it makes them much easier to retain, because you don't go from one story to another, and sometimes stories are cut up, and you're like, what is this about? What is that about? No, it like explains neatly what the stories are about. And Deuteronomy was a very popular book at that time. It's, I think, the 3rd most popular found book in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that explains why suddenly in 140 BC, everybody knows the biblical stories, whereas before they didn't know them. And people are named after biblical characters, where before that they were not. So everything works with Deuteronomy and 140 BCE, but still scholars, they date Deuteronomy or most of it, to 622 BCE. That's like 500 years earlier, according to accounts that we have in 2 chapters in the book of 2 Kings. That's chapters 22 and 23. This is like a flagship theory in academia, like a very, very dramatic religious reform. The scholars say happened in 622 BCE. It's like a theory from 200 years ago, more, from 1805. And we can debunk this theory right now together. I'm just like a podcaster, right? I'm punching up here. It's okay to debunk some scholarly theories. And it again completes and complements other scholarly theories, namely that those of Jonathan Adler. So I can go ahead and now debunk this theory that Deuteronomy was the scroll found in 2 Kings 22 and then read aloud to the people in 2 Kings 23, supposedly by Josiah in 622 BC. If we just scrutinize a little bit, just like think about it, it just falls apart. Makes no sense. But let me know if you have first any questions or comments, and then I'll go to the debunking. Debunking is fun.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what is the evidence that scholars present on the dating of Deuteronomy, or at least it's a code of laws that's between chapters 12 and 26, to date that to 622 BC? Okay, how do they connect the chapters 2 Kings 22 and 23? We can check them out a bit like in a moment. How do they connect that to Deuteronomy? So first thing, Deuteronomy has mostly one name, but has like a few additional names. Like the main name is the Book of the Covenant, Sefer HaBrit. In 2 Kings 23, when a King Josiah, supposedly reads the book, it's called the Book of the Covenant. So it has the same name as Deuteronomy. The found book is called, when they find it a chapter earlier, it's called the Torah book, Sefer Torah, the Book of the Law. And Deuteronomy is sometimes also called inside Deuteronomy, the Book of the Law. So it's like, okay, there's a connection here. The found book and the Deuteronomy have the same name. Scholars see Deuteronomy as a book that centralizes worship in the temple, which is what happens in 2 Kings 23. I think this is completely wrong, a complete misreading of Deuteronomy, but we'll get to that in a moment. In 2 Kings 23, they ban statues, they destroy temples, they even slaughter priests who operated the temples with statues. Okay, that's in the historical account, and that's an important part of Deuteronomy. Also, just like searching out people who worship statues and killing them so that it's over. We don't worship statues ever again. Supposedly 622 BCE. Okay. The found book, the red book, right, is read aloud. Deuteronomy is a book to be read aloud. It's like speeches by Moses. So that works. And there's also like a little bit of similar ideologies that connect these 2 chapters. Again, a nationalistic ideology, like independent of national independence, a love of God. The wording is similar. But the problem is that the scholars just, so it is connected. The book of Deuteronomy is definitely connected to the account of the found book in 2 Kings 22 and the red book when they read it in 2 Kings 23. But scholars just like take the account's word that it is actually describing events from 622 BC, just because it says so. Just takes the Bible at its word without scrutinizing it and thinking about it. And now that we'll do that, we'll see that even though this evidence seems like it's a strong evidence, you just have to think about it a little bit, and then it falls apart. Okay. First thing, the clearest thing, in 2 Kings 22, when they find the book, okay, the book ushers in, like brings terrible news of doom, Okay, when the king Josiah at the time, the book is being read to him, his immediate reaction is to tear his clothes, and then they're looking for a prophet to tell them what to do. And what he's told is that Judea will be destroyed. Terrible, terrible, terrible news. And the good news, there's like good news and bad news. Bad news, everybody's going to die, destruction. The good news for you, Josiah, you will die before everybody else. That's the good news. So you will not see it. This is when the book is found. You turn the page, you get to the next chapter, 2 Kings 23, and then everybody's happy. Suddenly everybody's happy. Now it's a book of covenant. They celebrate Passover. How did we go from doom to a celebration? Like these two things are diametrically opposed. And the book also changes name. I think that the title of the book is important. And a book of laws, Torah book, and a book of the covenant, Sefer HaBrit, it's not the same title of the book. So not only is the nature of the book diametrically opposed from doom to a celebration, it also changes names from a book of laws to a book of a covenant. It's very important. A book of laws is something very clear. A covenant is another thing. These two things are not the same. And it is basically the biggest red flag that scholars have noticed, but they have not managed to explain it, because their starting point is that this happened indeed in 622 BCE, and the problem here is that once you turn the page again to 2 Kings 24 and beyond, this reform, radical reform, revolution, everything that we said that happened in these two chapters just poof, disappears. Even in the same chapter, Josiah just dies just a few verses later. That's it. Nobody remembers this reform. Nobody talks about it. Nobody says it was good, it was bad. We have to change it. We have to reverse it. That's it. It disappears. There is no archaeological evidence for this reform to have happened in 622 BCE. Zero evidence. Nothing changed with the temple. Nothing changed in the way that people worshipped Yahweh. Statues remained a thing before 622 BCE, after 622 BCE, just as if it never happened in 622 BCE. And this is important also because scholars, in order to push this theory, they hype up this reform, the Josiah reform. In 622 BC, they say, wow, it was so violent, the Persians destroyed the shrines, and did this and this. It's huge. Okay, so where is it in the next chapter, in 621 BC? It just poof, disappears, doesn't exist. Okay, I think this should raise some suspicions that this is not actually, we shouldn't take the Bible's word for, dating purposes and that, as if they're all, the people who wrote the historical parts, they're just objective historians, just documenting what's happening without, doing some shenanigans or hidden agendas. Just a radical, super dramatic reform, a revolution that disappears a moment after it happened. This is not logical. Severe continuity problems. There is no other radical reform revolution in history that includes purges, slaughtering people, destroying shrines, that just disappears. Nothing happened. That nobody remembers it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody reflects on it, as if it never happened in 622 BCE. Okay, and this, the going poof, nobody remembering. This has also something in common with Deuteronomy itself. If you read the Bible in order, again, Deuteronomy talks about an incredible, a very dramatic, radical change in politics and in how you relate to your God and worship and that. You turn the page, you keep reading the next books. That's it. It disappears. It also disappears. Nobody remembers Deuteronomy, inside the Bible. Okay, they go in the next book, Joshua, they conquer the land. Then it says everybody forgot everything. Then you continue, Nobody remembers that they promised with this new covenant, no more statues, this, that, the other. We own this. The cities that they supposedly own, the people living in these cities later in the Bible, they don't know that this is a Levite cities or this city or that city. So we have a radical reform in the historical timeline of the Bible that just disappears if it happened in 622 BCE. And we have a radical reform in Deuteronomy that also disappears. So in 622 BCE, there is like literally zero evidence that the changes in Deuteronomy happened. People just forgot everything. And when did they remember them? And all the things in Deuteronomy are applied in the real world, where we can look and find and see and point to say, this happened, this happened, this happened, only in 140 BCE. So we are supposed to believe in this theory. We are supposed to believe that there was a dramatic revolution, religious revolution, violent religious revolution in 622 BCE that everybody forgot about a moment later, forgot about it for 500 years, and then suddenly everybody remembered it in 140 BCE and started applying everything that is in Deuteronomy in the real world, as we can see in archaeology, in Jonathan Adler's work, and also other historians. And no more statues, death to idolatrous priests, as both 2 Kings 22-23 and Deuteronomy say that happened in 140 BCE. They kicked out a much stronger foe from their land. This is again a core thing in Deuteronomy. We kicked out a much stronger foe from our land. This did not happen in 622 BCE. Like the Assyrians were like slowly fading, but they even never conquered Judea. And if we imagine, okay, so Josiah, the king Josiah in 622 BC is reading Deuteronomy to the people. He's telling them, you are now all getting lands, free homes for everybody. Everybody gets a free home, free land. Which land is he giving to them? Like, because there are no free lands. It's like a random Tuesday. He's reading, oh, everybody's getting land. Where are these lands? Okay. Yeah. So if you want to know where this reform of Josiah is, when it is, why it disappeared, if you take the scholarly opinion that it's from 622 BC, no. When was it? 140 BC. There are no continuity problems if you place Deuteronomy and these two chapters as written in 140 BC and backdated. No, like everything matches. The religious reform, the political reform, the justice reform, the banning of statues, the inheriting of free lands, a populist religion. It's all there in 140 BC. All we have to do is just learn about 140 BC, and then read Deuteronomy. Boom. Then it's just perfect. And also, in 622 BC, there was no biblical commentary. Okay, how can a text with biblical commentary? How can a text with biblical commentary can be dated to 500 years before there was such a thing as biblical commentary? It did not exist. Okay, we know when it started being a thing in Maccabean times. Okay, so we also see it in 1 Maccabees. It's not like my opinion or something controversial. And if you read it as 140 BC, when it says, on this very day you are getting land, on this very day, it's not Moses saying it outside the land. It's the Hebrew leader, Shimon Tassi, after independence, tells the Hebrews, you are all getting lands today. Because there's a lot of free land now, because a lot of foreigners and priests have been kicked out and their land was appropriated. Also, 2 Kings 23 talks about Passover, the celebration of Passover. Dr. Adler, he proves that Passover became a thing in 140 BC, not 500 years earlier, 622 BC. No biblical commentary then, no Passover. and also the Hebrew of Deuteronomy. And this is not my opinion. This is like an agreed fact. Super rich, super wordy, super elaborate, the most in the Bible. Hence, it is new, because languages, this is like basic linguistics. I'm not a linguist, but basic linguistics tells us languages evolve over time, become richer, more wordy, more elaborate. Okay, so how can a book be dated to 622 BCE, before Babylonian times, before Persian times, before Hellenistic times, and be so, and its language can be so much more evolved than the language than texts that were written, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later? We have to again accept so many problems with continuity. We have to accept that the Hebrews, for some reason, forgot how to speak their language well, and then they remembered it 400 or 500 years later. That's not a thing. That's like anti-scientific. If the Hebrew is more evolved, it means that it is newer. It's from 140 BC, and Deuteronomy specifically, if you just understand that it was a book meant to be read aloud. It also says, the book says, you have to read it aloud over and over, and you have to read it over and over and over. Unlike other stories, Jacob, you probably remember we talked about a lot of texts that we can date to 140 BCE, but these were merely stories. Deuteronomy is a series of speeches given to regular people. You want them to understand. You don't want to mimic like an older language to make the text seem older, which is what scribes in the ancient world did when they wrote stories. They always wrote them with a slightly older language to give them like a more of an authentic feel. That does not exist in Deuteronomy, because you want people to understand what are the laws of this new land, what's going on, what is our national narrative, what is our religious narrative. So it's just, for me, clearly from 140 BC. And the fact, like one of the reasons that scholars, one of the mistakes that they make here is that they think that Deuteronomy centralizes the worship in the Hebrew temple, when in fact it does the opposite. It decentralizes the worship in Jerusalem, opens up the worship, not all of it, most of it, some of it, to do where you live. This was the reality in 140 BC, again, according to Jonathan Adler's work, that suddenly people are celebrating the festivals where they live. And you can contrast two accounts of Passover, okay? We have Deuteronomy 16 that says, in Passover, you have to come to the temple. You have to come to the temple. You cannot stay where you live. You have to come to the temple. But if you read the rules of Passover in Exodus 12 and 13, that's the main chapters about Exodus, it tells you that you have to stay in your home until nightfall, until the morning. You cannot go out. You have to stay. You have to eat at home. You have to roast the lamb and not boil it, as Deuteronomy says. So basically, we have to understand that Deuteronomy 16, the chapter that supposedly centralizes worship, that describes the priestly reality that we know existed from Persian times until 140 BCE. The priests, they controlled the temple. You had to come 3 times a year, do pilgrimage. And then the Maccabees, they changed that. Okay, so once you just understand that, you see Deuteronomy 16 that supposedly centralizes worship, that's from Persian times. It describes the reality, the known reality of Persian times. And then came the Maccabees and said, no, now we decentralize it. Because outside of this chapter, Deuteronomy 16, before it and after it, you just read the rules. It says you have to come to the temple, but if it's too far, you don't have to go. You don't have to come. You can stay where you live and do it where you live. And also it says that when you do come to the temple, you don't have to bring all your stuff that you bring with you, whatever offerings and stuff, to the priests, as you had to do when the priests control the temple. No, you bring it with you to Jerusalem, to sell it, to turn it into money and spend it on yourself and your family to have a good time, basically. Okay, it's not you don't have to, there's no like bribery to priests. Okay, so that again decreases the power and the influence of the temple. So we have in Deuteronomy one chapter that is clearly priestly. Deuteronomy 16 says you have to go to the temple. Before it and after it says you have to go to the temple, but if it's too far, if your stuff is too heavy, that's okay. Stay where you are. And if you go to the temple, you don't have to give anything to the priest. You just do whatever. Do it for yourself. With your family, have a good time, spend some time in Jerusalem, and it works with what we know in Jerusalem. That was it was depopulated around 140 BC because of the civil war, kicking out the priests because they were centered in Jerusalem. So then after that, you want to repopulate it, and you want to energize the economy, people to come and spend money. It's basically an economic policy. So when we read the biblical text, we always have to have in the back of our minds the political, social reality that we know of in each of the periods of Hebrew history, and then we can match the book to the reality that is described in each book, in this case Deuteronomy, to the different realities that we know in history. And we know the reality of 140 BCE. Okay, again, Jonathan Adler did great work in that. Once we know that, we read Deuteronomy and say, it describes the reality that Jonathan Adler meticulously details in his academic research. I can get into, on my podcast, I will get into like all the evidence and stuff, but I can get into more details because I think it was read aloud, Deuteronomy, on a specific day, on a very, very specific day, on one day, mostly. But before I get into that, please, happy to be scrutinized. Any question, anything? Yeah.
So my question is, and I've asked a very similar question to this in the last, it was the first show that we did together. What do you make of Deuteronomy and the Septuagint? And I've asked you this before, that the Septuagint is understood to be created in the 3rd century BCE. Now, even then, it's pretty close to your point to the degree that, Josiah, the Josiah reform is definitely not historical. And even if there was a law code that Hilkiah, I guess, fabricated, it seems to me one way or the other it was exaggerated and reinterpreted to fit the narrative being sold by the author of Deuteronomy. Either way, it's the Josiah situation as we're sold is as it is presented to us did not occur. So my question to you is this: Deuteronomy was created in 140 BCE. What is its connection to the Septuagint, which supposedly came from the century before?
Yeah, so the Septuagint, we already discussed it, right? It was created a century before, but everybody agrees that it was updated later, right? The book of Daniel and other texts are dated to after that. There's no reason to believe that there would be a problem updating the translation of the Bible when the Bible itself was updated. And the Maccabees, they were allies with the Hebrews in Egypt who translated the Bible to ancient Greek. So they would be aligned and would have no problems in updating the Greek accordingly. I should say so. In the last month, I posted 3 episodes on my podcast with my friend Gary Stevens. He's from the History in the Bible podcast. We started going over the books of the Bible and comparing the differences between the Hebrew Masoretic version, the Hebrew text, and the ancient Greek version. and trying to understand the very, very, slight differences between the two versions, according to the reality that I presented now. Okay, we have the Hebrews living in Egypt, living in Alexandria. Their Hebrew religion and theology is different from that of the priests who dominated Judea for 400 years and still resided in Persia, Babylonia, were super successful. There were no priests in Egypt, in Alexandria. All the priests were taken in 587 BCE. They were taken to Babylonia. A lot of them stayed there when it became Persia. Some of them returned, and then they were kicked out in 140 BC. So they were very, very different religions. And once we look at it this way, we understand, okay, the Septuagint is more closely aligned with the people who lived in Egypt, and the Hebrew Masoretic text is more closely aligned to the priests. Then you go over all the tiny differences. This is what we did in the last month. We went over the differences in the book of Jeremiah, the letter of Jeremiah, and in David's origin story in the books of Samuel. And then you can see that this explains all of the differences, all of the little differences. Just understanding that the Septuagint was closer to the people living in Egypt than also to the Maccabees and to their version of the religion, which was much more open and cosmopolitan, and also more about stories. And the Masoretic version was closer to the priests. They are more strict. It's about being, doing the priestly things correctly. And also, Hebrew was, a holy language. And it is clear from the Hebrew text in the Bible that you could not change the Hebrew text that was there. You could add more text, but you could not erase. Why is it clear? Because we have a lot of additions that if you could delete something, you would just delete it. For example, you have a verb in the singular when you have two people, okay? Two people are walking in the singular, and then you have additions that try to smooth it out in Hebrew. Okay, that's especially we see that in Exodus when Moses and Aaron are walking together by themselves and stuff like that. In Hebrew, you see like Moses and Aaron is walking. They are walking together, Moses and Aaron, something like that. So you see like an addition. And this was corrected in the translations because ancient Greek was not a holy language. You could correct it also in English. If you read it in English, like all these grammar problems, which are there in Hebrew, are not there in Greek and in English. Because when it's possible to delete and change things in a non-holy language where it is not possible to do it in a holy language. This is why the Masoretic text, the difference is basically like one big, like the way that these differences are applied, are seen, is that the Masoretic text in Hebrew has a lot more, has excess text compared to the Greek one. The Greek one is cleaner, smoother. In the David origin stories, you have in Hebrew a lot of, he's introduced twice, and Saul forgets who he was, even though he's been playing music for him for like a few months. And now he's like, who is this guy? All kinds of weird stuff taken out in the Greek. Does not exist in the Greek because it's not a holy language. You're able to delete something in ancient Greek. And also the Hebrews in Alexandria who translated the Bible to ancient Greek, the Septuagint, they were just like more laid back about their religion, right? We know that also from Dr. Gad Barnea's work. They had other temples there. They were cool with other gods. They had names, first Egyptian pharaonic names, then Persian names, and then Hellenistic names. They were very, very chill about it. So this is how I would answer that question.
That's very interesting. The parallels to the Maccabean period that you've shown with the book of Deuteronomy. What I've noticed is that myself is that in general, like not just with Deuteronomy, but like the like to me, like when I look at the entire Torah, there's no there's no evidence that it existed. Not really until the 3rd century BCE, and I think that the late Russell Gomerican was right that it came out not too terribly long before the Septuagint. The Septuagint was it seems to be like, to me, an immediate translation of the original text. So let's assume for a second that Deuteronomy was still there. Maybe it's like, let's just say it's super, super small compared to the Maccabean version that you're talking about.
Mm.
Do you think that maybe that tiny version of Deuteronomy might have been just that little story about Josiah, and maybe a little bit of other stuff, and that was it? Then the Maccabean narrative with Simon Fiasi was integrated into the text.
Yeah, I would say, again, now I'm still working on the season of Deuteronomy. I will start posting in January. But I will say this: so scholars say that like it's a separate source, and it's like one source, right? The D source, and it's like all of it is the D source. This is incorrect. The Deuteronomy 16, for me, clearly priestly. Okay, it's supposed to be the P source, not the D source, and there are a couple of other priestly things. You just have to look for them, and then you see them. But other than that, it's a huge chunk of Maccabean for 140 BCE, and a few changes later. So I would say that Deuteronomy did not exist before 140 BCE. Its name, by the way, Deuteronomy, it was known for, I think, a century by another name in Hebrew. Deuteronomy, like in Hebrew, it's called the Devarim, which means things, because it begins like, these are the things that Yahweh said to Moses. But it was called in Hebrew Mishnah Torah. Mishnah Torah, that means Deuteronomy, second law, okay, because it's the second covenant. First covenant was the priestly covenant. When they returned from Persia, built the temple, first covenant. Second covenant, Maccabees, kicking them out. Now we're replacing the covenant. The people before us didn't do things correctly, okay, they betrayed God, they worshipped other gods, they were corrupt. Also, Deuteronomy is anti-corruption. And the Maccabees were very clear about the priests in their time being corrupt and not really loving God. They were just whatever. It was like for them, the temple became like an ATM, right? Whatever. You run for office to make money. It's not like really priesting. And also, so we'll say Mishnah Torah. If we go to the Mishnah, okay, the Mishnah, that's a Hebrew book that has some very old historical accounts in it from 200 CE, has some accounts of this very period that we are talking about, the Maccabean period. And I looked into what the Mishnah says about Yom Kippur. How was Yom Kippur celebrated during the temple? Because by 200 CE, the temple had been destroyed. And again, Dr. Adler proved Yom Kippur began 140 BCE. If it existed before, there is zero evidence. So if there's zero evidence, there's zero reason to believe that it existed before. And the way that it describes Yom Kippur in the temple, the biggest day of the year, a guy named Shimon, okay, was the most famous person to do the Yom Kippur ceremony. And it describes also the high priest of this Yom Kippur as basically not being a real priest, okay? People have to explain to him, that's in the Mishnah, people have to explain to him how to perform all the ceremonies of Yom Kippur, which the text says the traditions just changed from being more closely aligned with the Sadducees, the Tzaddokites, the priests, changed to how the Sanhedrin and you can say like Pharisees changed it. And they have to tell him, you cannot do it the way that they did it. Please promise us. You have to go inside the temple by yourself. We cannot go with you. You cannot do it this way. You have to do it that way. And they have to basically coach him. This is what you're doing. This is what you're doing. This is what you're doing. What kind of high priest doesn't know how to priest the greatest, the holiest day of the year. A high priest who is not really a priest. Shimon Tassi, he was the high priest only because that was like the highest job in the land, and in order to be the ruler, not like a ruler, it was like a little bit democratic, but it's like basically the head of state, you have to be the high priest. But he's not a priest. They have to explain it to him. He's very respectful. They like him. It's not that they're trying to make him look bad and say, oh, the priests are terrible. No, it's saying he's a good person. But we just have to explain to him how to do it. Also because it's a new ceremony just invented in 140 BC. So I think that Deuteronomy, I would say 70% of it was read on one day. As it says, the book is speeches. Okay, it's to be read aloud. If you read it aloud, it's stirring. The Hebrew is beautiful. Wow, it's so emotional. And it was read aloud to the people on Yom Kippur in 140 BCE, which was, I think I can prove it, one day after Hebrew independence, Maccabean independence. Hebrew independence, Maccabean independence celebrated on the 18th of the month of Elul. That's, let's say, August. Okay, the 18th of Elul. And I think the next day was the first Yom Kippur. I can give you a little bit details unless you have some questions, or I'll just detail why.
Keep going.
Okay. Scholars agree the Maccabees switched calendars, Hebrew calendars. Before the Maccabees, we had the priestly solar calendar. The year was 364 days, set in stone for years, forever, ever, never changed, never will change. They changed it. They switched from solar to lunar, like the Hellenistic one. And when that happened, 10 days were erased from the calendar because their year was 10 days shorter, 354 days. So the moment the calendar switch becomes official, it happened at some time when you switch calendars, it's like happens in one day. You basically, at that time, you jump 10 days ahead in the calendar. It's not a theoretical change when you switch calendars. If we now switch calendars to a different system, then we have to jump days or go back, right? So if we understand they gained independence officially on the 18th of Elul, that's August, let's say, that's when it becomes, the calendar switch becomes official because that's when they rule officially. So the next day is not the 19th of Elul, we jump 10 days forward. It's the 29th of Elul, which is incidentally the last day of the year. Okay, the last day of the year. So here we have to think about something. Does it make sense that Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, takes place 10 days after the beginning of the year? Or does it make more sense to have a Day of Atonement on the final day of the year? Because the way that is today, Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the year. So supposedly we have to believe that the Hebrews, they set it up this way. The 29th of Elul till today is regarded as a day of forgiveness and atonement. Till today, the last day of the year. The next day is the 1st of Tishrei, let's say the 1st of September, after August, September. We celebrate a new year. We have blessings for the new year. May the upcoming year be fantastic. Oh, everybody's happy. And now we're supposedly going through 10 terrible days to open the year. The 10 terrible days, that's what it's called. That's what it's called. We open the year with 10 terrible days right after we celebrate. And then we atone on the 10th day of the year for the sins of the past year. That does not make sense at all, like human sense. You want to atone for the sins of the past year on the last day of the year, and then you open a new leaf. You want to start the new year with a, clean slate. Just imagine you have like 10 terrible days from January 1st to January 10. You open the year with the 10 worst days of the year, and you have to think, oh, what the terrible things that I did in the past year, and then you atone on the 10th of January. Now you make your New Year's resolutions on the 31st of December. Okay, the past year is behind me. Now I begin with a new leaf. That just makes sense. Okay, and then when you go to the Mishnah, and other texts after the Mishnah, how the Yom Kippur day was celebrated, when the temple was there. You have the high priest making blessings and prayers for a good upcoming new year. He says, may the upcoming year be great and fantastic and wonderful. Till today, there are some prayers, the Yom Kippur prayers have that prayer. On the 10th day of the year, supposedly, we are now praying for an upcoming year that will be good. But the year already started 10 days ago. It makes a lot more sense that it was the final day of the year, Elul 29th. Okay, 18th of Elul, this is in 1 Maccabean independence. Then the calendar reform, which everybody agrees happened, everybody agrees shortened the year by 10 days. It could only become official once the state is independent. So the next day, it's not the 19th of Elul, it's the 29th of Elul, the last day of the year. Okay, till today, a day for forgiveness. It cannot be that we have the last day of the year, a day for forgiveness, then we celebrate, then we contemplate, then we forgive again. Why this mess? It doesn't make any sense. What makes sense is that you finish the year, you ask for forgiveness, you atone, you open the new year, with a clean slate. And the reason that Yom Kippur was made the holiest, the most important day in the Hebrew calendar is because of this chronology. Okay, 18th of Elul, independence, new constitution. 19th of Elul, the reading of Deuteronomy. Shimon Tassi is reading that. He's telling them, you are getting lands this very day, because now everybody's getting lands this very day. It says Deuteronomy, lands that you didn't buy, houses you didn't build, you're getting them free. That's the reality of 140 BCE. And now it makes also sense that Deuteronomy tells them this very day it is happening. If it's in the desert, it's going to take a very long time until they have their lands. It doesn't work. What is happening this very day? Moses has to die. There's so much stuff going on. Like, nothing is happening this very day. If you place it in 622 BCE, nothing happens this very day. If you place it on the last day of the year, the reading of Deuteronomy, there are a few additions also to Deuteronomy after that, but the core of it, like 70-80% of it, you read it as read aloud a day after independence, telling people, this is our religion. These are our stories. Here are the 10 commandments. Nobody knows about the 10 commandments before Maccabean times. Then everybody knows about the 10 commandments after, like during Maccabean times. And also 10, that's a Hellenistic number. It's not a priestly number. They liked 7. Okay, everything was in 7. Their calendar, the solar calendar, 364 days calendar, everything was in 7s. And also, there are many accounts. People can go look for them. I found them. It's not like a secret. That the dating of Yom Kippur specifically, that was a core controversy between the priests and the Maccabees. The Maccabees changed the day of Yom Kippur, basically the last day of the year, and there was fighting about it. They killed priests in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're writing, oh my goodness, the way that they celebrated Yom Kippur on the wrong day, 10 days because of the switch of the calendar. Oh, that's terrible, because now we're celebrating it like an unauspicious day. There's so much mess that we have to accept in order to place Deuteronomy in 622 BC or any other time. Once you just place it in 140 BC, you're like, just like everything just fits. It was the last day of the year. They wanted to atone for all the sins that everybody committed during the Civil War. Everybody commits sins during the Civil War. If you go over 10 commandments, we can do that now. With 140 BC in mind, every single commandment is about 140 BC. You have one God, no other gods, no statues, okay, because we just got rid of all the statues, okay. You cannot lie under oath, because we just set up an independent justice system. After a civil war where people murder each other, they take their stuff, there's no more killing, nothing. Now you have the Shabbat. Jonathan Adler says started in 140 BCE, the Shabbat. Okay, so the Shabbat, everybody gets a free day off during the Shabbat. It's a populistic regime. Before that, they had to work for the priests, right? They were slaves also to the priests in many ways. So if we just place it there, just everything just falls in line. There are no problems at all.
Yeah, that's a pretty compelling argument. I would want to think about it some more, but I get what you're saying. I see it. And speaking of what you mentioned earlier about Deuteronomy being referred to as the D source, I think this is a problem in both fields. I've talked about it before. I've complained about it before, and I'm not alone. I think that eventually there will be others that will come out and say the hypothetical sources presented in the documentary hypothesis just doesn't make sense. Like we're throwing letters in the alphabet, throwing stuff at the wall, and then assigning. It's like watching the movie They Live. You know, when the main character of the movie puts on glasses and he can see who's really human and who's not. And in the same way, like, okay, so we can put on magic glasses and see which pieces of a text goes back to a text that's lost. I'm like, I don't believe in that. I don't think we got a magic wand that can decipher, okay, we got pieces of this that goes back earlier. But the problem is if we go with that methodology, you can imagine anything being in a hypothetical document. And that's the problem. In the same way that New Testament scholars are moving away from believing the Q source, because Q is a hypothetical source behind Matthew and Luke, and we do not have evidence that it existed. Although there are some quasi similar stuff going on, like with Thomas and the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, I'm not going to get into here. But the point that I'm making is that going back to Adler's point, you have these laws being institutionalized in toward the end of the first millennium BCE, which has got no evidence that's happening earlier at all. Nobody attests to it. The Elephantine Papyri has no evidence of it at all. I mean, Yahweh even has a wife in the Elephantine Papyri. It's the same wife as Baal Hadad, major god the major Canaanite god. So that's a huge problem. And are we seriously expected to believe that the Elephantine Papyri, just for the people that wrote it, just for some reason chose not to mention any of it? That doesn't make any sense at all.
We have to accept so much weird stuff that doesn't make any sense in order to accept the mainstream biblical scholarship theories in general, and about Deuteronomy in particular, and how it connects again to Yom Kippur. Just like a weird day of atonement, a book that nobody remembers, a revolution that nobody remembers. Everybody remembers revolutions, violent revolutions. It's like the New Covenant is basically like the Protestant Reformation, changing the religion from a priestly hierarchical religion centered in the temple to a Protestant religion that is more populist, more direct, more like an emotional connection, direct emotional connection between the person and God. People don't forget the Protestant Revolution, the Protestant Reformation. That's not a possibility. If you don't have any evidence for a revolution happening, you have to switch theories. Okay, it's just like it doesn't make any sense. But everybody remember the Maccabean Revolution, the Maccabean Reformation changed religion, the Jewish religion till today. Of course, it changed a little bit later, also after the destruction of the temple. We have to look for theories that make sense, and not theories handed down. You know, the guy that came up with the theory, the Josiah Scroll theory, he lived in 1805 CE. He was a religious person. Nobody wanted to, we had 200 years to scrutinize this theory and see, hey, if there was indeed a revolution, how come it disappeared right after it happened? How come nobody remembers it? How come we don't have any evidence? This is like the most popular theory in biblical scholarship. I'm so disappointed in, like, with with biblical scholarship, honestly, because I had, like, before I started doing this podcast, I had, like, this notion that, no, like, serious people scrutinizing everything, very, very careful. No, this is just like accepting what their elders said before them, and just like taking it at face value. And this is the starting point. The previous theories, this is where we begin. Oh, this reform disappears into the thin air, no evidence. Oh, maybe we can explain it this way, that way. No, just rethink it. Start with what you know, and then connect the texts, the reality in the texts, to the reality that we know. That's the best way to do it. The reality that we know from history and archaeology, in the case of 140 BC, from Jonathan Adler's great work, you just say, okay, this is the reality. Now let's look for this reality in the biblical texts. Why do you have to take the Bible's word that the Passover in Exodus 12 and 13 was written in the desert? Because it says so. Why do you have to take the Bible's word that the scroll that was read in 2 Kings 23 and 22 and 23, it says that it's from 622 BC? Oh, let's just accept it. No, we have what we know happened. Let's find texts that match that. We know that people write about the reality. They don't write about a reality that has nothing to do with them, especially with important stuff like revolutions and reformations.
It's a very good point. I agree. And this is the problem. Like, they teach you in college. There's a couple, many fallacies, many things that are fallacies. One of those fallacies is argument from authority. They teach you that's a fallacy. Argument from majority, that's another fallacy. When you believe blindly, because, okay, somebody has a PhD, everything they say is the truth. That's like believing scripture because it's supposedly divine. So it's kind of the same thing. Now, somebody might just scream at me and say, "Oh, that's nonsense. How is that the same thing?" Okay, so here's the problem. I'll give one example real quick of why it's a problem to believe authority. It's just because it's authority. And this is not the only reason to see that it's a fallacy, but this is one among many. Because what happens when there's authorities that contradict each other?
Yeah.
What do? Are we going to play the game, pick the PhD that got it right? Then you start realizing, wait a minute, this is circular. That doesn't make sense. Let's calm down and think for a minute. And sometimes I got people in comments. I'm not going to go into the examples, but sometimes I'll get comments here or comments there. And I see some indications, like there's some people that'll comment on a video that have never commented on my channel before, because they got all up in their feelings. I had somebody on that they didn't like. I don't even bother. I don't bother responding to those comments. They're just a waste of my time. And one example where scholars are really desperate to try to put these beliefs as early in time as possible with no evidence at all. And I hate to say it because I really tried to bite my tongue on this for quite a long time. I have to say it. Well, going into the point of malicious fabrication of evidence out of sheer desperation. I'll give an example.
I'll give another example, please.
Yeah, Yahweh as I can't quite remember what this theory is called, but I think it's called something like the Midianite hypothesis for Yahweh worship. And I'm like, okay, we're just making stuff up. There is
exactly
no evidence of this at all. Well, we're going to believe part of the Torah for this. Why? Or there's a little text about Yah ben Il in Ugaritic text. It's like, but there's no narrative about this Yah. Like, we know nothing about him other than that one little tiny line. But as scholars like Niels Peter Lemke, who agrees with me on this, it's like, that's just Yam, the sea god. And if you go in the Hebrew Bible, when Yahweh fights the sea in Hebrew, Yam. The same thing, and Baal-Hadad defeats Yam, the sea god. So Baal-Hadad and Yahweh, they have a lot of the same enemies. I've done shows about that, how Baal-Hadad and Yahweh are extremely similar gods, like really, 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 really similar. There's nothing like it. I won't go into the whole thing because I've done long shows about that, about how I connect them. But the fact is, that's not Yam. I didn't say it right. Yah ben Il is Yam, the god of the seas.
Right. In the Ugaritic text. Yeah.
Right. It's not Yahweh. They're just saying it. Oh, it just sounds like Yahweh, so it must be. I've seen theories like that where, like, well, some will say that Yahweh is connected to Yah, a moon god in Egypt. Like, we could keep going, there are several gods that sound like Yahweh.
Yeah.
I mean, some even tried to connect it to Ea, and this is how you start knowing that this is ridiculous. So Ea is a Babylonian god. He's the equivalent of Enki. It just never ends. And there's a lot of complications about Ea that we're not going to get into here because it's going to go way off topic. But this is the problem, that the reason that they do that is because they want to preserve the uniqueness of Yahweh. That's the issue here. They want to preserve the uniqueness.
To piggyback on your point, can I interject?
Yeah,
okay?
Go ahead.
First, to your point about appeal to authority, what happens when you mentioned what happened when we have two contradicting authorities, which the case is 95% of the time in academia. Also, we have the history of biblical scholarship. We know that all of these authorities have been wrong, dead wrong. Like a new scholar say, oh, the previous people were wrong. We are right. And I think one of the reasons that is this appeal to authority and this desperation to prove that the Torah, the Bible, is in some way real and described like a real reality as it is described, it's because biblical scholarship is a branch that grew out of biblical commentary, religious biblical commentary that has been going on for 2,000 years until secular people, slightly more secular people came. Now we have to look at it more clearly. But they didn't just say, okay, we have to look at it from scratch. They just like grew out of the priestly establishment, whether Christian or Jewish. And you see that the establishment, the academic biblical scholarship establishment is very much the same as like the priestly thing. You cannot contradict the person above. It's like you said, you have to bite your tongue. Why? Like for me, it's the same, right? Like why do we have to be so careful at saying that that scholars are wrong? I mean, I'm 46 now. Okay. I have friends who are scholars. I have friends who are doctors. They're regular people. The regular people. We're all regular people. I don't appeal to any authority. Okay. There's evidence, historical evidence, archaeological evidence, the text. If anybody can come up with a better explanation that connects all of those about Deuteronomy, please go ahead. Whatever. It's not about shut up. I'm talking now. No, it's not about that. It's just like we have to go with what makes sense. And to your also points about desperation, just an example that really ruffled my feathers. A year ago, I was preparing an episode about Richard Elliott Friedman's book, The Exodus, and he talks there. Also, he gives talks about it, right? On his YouTube channel, and there, just like a little sleight of hand to prove his point that there was a Levite exodus in the 1200 BCE because of blah, 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 just making up a story that doesn't exist. He bases it on how he sees the different sources, which of them are Levite sources. They don't say, hey, I'm a Levite source. He says they're a Levite source. And then he says, only Levites talk about circumcision, whether real circumcision or as an expression, you circumcise your heart, uncircumcised heart. And then he mentions there Jeremiah and Ezekiel. He says, they are priests / there are Levites. I'm like, hey, stop right there one moment. Priests and Levites is not the same thing. Priest is Kohen, a Levite is Levi. Two different clans. Till today, you are either Kohen or you are Levi. You are not Kohen Levi. That does not exist. That does not exist. unless you get married, whatever, a Levi gets married to a Kohen, then you can Levi, Kohen, Kohen, Levi. That does not exist. Separate groups. When does the Levite group appear in history? Maccabean times. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, the first time it appears is in Maccabean times. Jeremiah was not a Levite. He doesn't say that he was a Levite. Ezekiel was not a Levite. They were Kohanim, priests. These two things are not the same. So it's like a sleight of hand / with appeal to authority. Also, Richard Elliott Friedman, with all due respect, a bully, bullies his opponents in his own talks, bullies his academic opponents. So of course, after that, you're afraid to criticize authority. Your career is based on that. I'm just a podcaster. My career is not right? It's not based on whether a scholar says this or that about me. I don't need them for jobs or for anything. So I can just say whatever, speak my mind. And if I'm wrong, my listeners will tell you, hey, this is wrong, or whatever. Later on, I will say, that's kind of wrong. I have to amend that. But also scholars, once they write a book about it, it's very difficult for them to say, I was wrong.
Point. I've made that point before. Mm-hmm.
You made that point before. Why, are you going to throw away your book?
Right, because once they put so much work into a book, it's very rare. It's very rare that they'll change their mind. They're going to stay committed to what's in there for the rest of their life.
On a podcast or YouTube channel, it's easy to change your mind. It's like, before I thought that, now I think that it's more like this. Sure. No problem. People accept it. You just move on. Whatever. I'm not perfect or whatever. We're just people. Everybody's people. Scholars are people. Priests are people. Biblical authors are people. YouTubers, podcasters are people. People are people. Okay. We can think independently. We can look at the text. We can look at the evidence, and we can connect the things together. They're not special. We're just people.
Right. What I like about the late Russell Gumerican and Gad Bernia, Jonathan Adler, Niels Peter Lemke, and others, they are getting scholars to open up more. Again, a lot of them are not doing this yet, but it's happening. The progress is starting, and they're opening up to revising the dating of the Hebrew Bible, as they should. And a point that I've made before, and I'll make it again, is let's think about Baal worship and like the criticism of Baal worship in the Hebrew Bible. To the response that some have made to my claim that Yahweh is a continuity of Baal Hadad is, well, that's impossible because Baal is a false god. Well, Baal's a title. It just means Lord. That's not an argument against this at all. Right. Now, let's talk about child sacrifice associated with Baal worship and Moloch worship. This is about Baal Hammon. How do I know that? Because for a long time, scholars believe that this was propaganda by Greco-Roman historians when they said that the Carthaginians were sacrificing infants brutally to Baal Hammon. Then they did the archaeology and found the proof. Like, okay, right. So it did happen. So where did the Hebrew Bible get the information from to speak against Baal worship? Well, let's think about it like this. The Septuagint supposedly comes out around the mid-2nd century BCE. And what's happening in the mid-2nd century BCE? The First Punic War. So I think that the authors of the Hebrew Bible got their information from Greco-Roman polemics against Carthage. I think they heard about the Punic War, and they are critiquing Baal worship and putting things in Elijah's mouth. And also potentially backdating critiques of Baal worship to King Ahab's day and the whole Jezebel thing and all that. But this is about the First Punic War. That's what it's really about, in my view.
Yeah, we can look, for example, like when in Hebrew history was there like intense controversy over statue worshiping. We have accounts in the book of Ezekiel that if you read them, they just like, seem very believable, like an agenda or something. Ezekiel is railing. People in Babylonia are worshiping foreign gods. It makes sense, like their god just destroyed their land. Their temple is destroyed. Maybe he's a loser god because here they are, they lost. And now they're worshiping other gods. They have no, qualms about that. Okay, and also in parts of a book of Isaiah that were written in Babylonian times, also we have that idol worshiping a big issue. Then with the priests, we know this from history and archaeology. They were also worshiping statues and other gods, and it wasn't a problem. And it becomes an intense problem in Maccabean times, peaking in 140 BCE when it ends. So when you look at texts that are very, very angry and forceful, and say that, oh my goodness, statue worshiping is terrible, we have to end it, you have to put it in one of these two contexts. You cannot put it 622 BC. What happened in 622 BC with the statues? Nothing happened. Go look for when this was a reality, and then see if everything fits. If you find a problem and it doesn't fit, fine. But this is how we have to operate. Start with what we know to be true, the context, the political, the social, the geopolitical context, and then you put the text together with the reality. Like scholars outside of biblical scholarship, they're doing that with other texts, with Hellenistic texts, like with Greek tragedies and treatises and comedies. You have a story about Odysseus. Okay, scholars are not saying, oh, this is actually about Odysseus. No, they say, the reason that Odysseus here is such a good guy is because in this period, this fits what they were thinking about, the political context, the social context. In this period fits this story, hence they are together. Uncontroversial. 100 years later, there's a negative story about Odysseus. And scholars say, oh, this is 100 years later because then they didn't like leaders with a smooth tongue, whatever. Like uncontroversial scholarship about texts that are not scripture or divine. We do not take other texts at their word for dating and stuff. We look at them critically, except when it's the Bible. And when you've been trained in academia for all this time, with appeal to authority, with only a set of options, you're a maximalist, you're a minimalist. This is just like a scholarly concoction. The Deuteronomic historian, where is he in the world? There is no D source. There is an M source, Maccabean. The Maccabeans are real. The Maccabees are real. They existed in the world. Okay, let's learn about the Maccabees, and then let's read the Bible and find texts that match the Maccabees. Once we do that, and we already did that, right, together, if you remember, with the book of Nehemiah.
Oh, yeah.
I listed like 13 things about Nehemiah that are identical to Shimon Tassi, the leader of the Maccabees. Rebuild the Jerusalem walls, a new constitution, a new assembly, paid with his own money, like to soldiers and on and on. I don't remember anything. 13 things identical in the story and in history. It's the other like match because they're supposed to match, or just like everything is a coincidence. Oh, coincidence. But it's not even that. It's just like they're not even looking at that. And you know why they're not even looking at Maccabean times? In Chazal, I don't know how you call it in English. Chazal, that's like the elders, sages or something, whatever. Hebrew sages from whatever 200 CE and stuff. They talk about a very, very important Shimon, who sealed the Bible. That's in Chazal. A person named Shimon sealed the Bible in a popular assembly. So they looked. First, Chazal looked. Okay, who was named Shimon? They didn't like the Maccabees because after Shimon came the leaders who were terrible. So the Maccabees, nobody liked them later. So they're looking, there was some kind of Shimon. We have a list of some Shimon in 320 BCE. And another Shimon, his grandson, in 270 BCE or something like that. And it's one of these two. religious theologians said that in whatever 200 CE, something like that, and just scholars just don't even check if that makes sense. What happened in 322 BCE that the Bible would suddenly be so revamped? Just somebody coming, oh, you know what? Let's revamp the Bible. Why? What's going on? Do we have any evidence for that? But there was a person named Shimon, a very important person named Shimon, who did a popular assembly. He presided over the final editing of the Bible. There were a few changes later, but he presided. This Shimon, he was the leader of the popular assembly. This is a historical fact. Once you put everything together, it's not complicated, right? It may be complicated, right, to put it all together. But once you put it all together, the picture always has to be non-complicated. You know, when I'm talking to scholars about the documentary hypothesis, you ask them, what is the documentary hypothesis? Oh, the e-source is this and it's that. And you're like, I don't understand. What are you talking about? What does this mean? Okay. If you cannot explain something to a regular person in a way, like there is not a biblical scholar, in a way that just like people talk and understand, then your theory, there's a problem with the theory. Because reality is not like obscure or secret or complicated. Like it might be secret or obscure or complicated for us, but how things happen, a person wrote, that is not complicated. A person added text, that is simple. It happened at a specific time, okay? So the reality that you present has to be simple, has to make sense, has to click. Everything has to be to put together. You're gonna, I love this theory about Josiah. There is no evidence for that. Okay, let me see how I can explain that. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that, maybe it's the other, maybe it's the Deuteronomic source, maybe it's the post-Deuteronomic source. I don't understand anything. And this is also part of the goal, right? Like to disempower us, this is also a little bit priestly. Sorry, going out on this tangent, that we have to listen to them. I disagree.
The last thing I want to ask you real quick before we close is, what are your thoughts on the Dead Sea Scrolls? Okay, let me rephrase that question, but specifically the Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts of Deuteronomy, and when did they date?
This I have yet to look into. I'm working on the season now. It will come out in January. I will look into that. I would say, just to give a very, very simple example that I think illustrates what is the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls, we know, is a priestly project. It's not controversial. This is a priestly project. We place that in the reality of 140 BC. Priests being kicked out. They read about it, okay, kicked out of the temple. Now we have the editing of the Bible, you know, like Maccabean, and they're basically now trying to add their stuff. You cannot take out anything from the Bible in Hebrew. You cannot take out anything from the Bible. So they're not erasing the editing that was done in 140 BC. They're just adding stuff. So just like an example, tiny example. The Bible begins with the creation story, and all of the waters gathered in one place to create the sea. Makom echad. One place. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, it doesn't say Makom echad, one place. It says mikveh echad, one mikveh, whatever. It's like a source of water. Mikveh, makom. You have three identical letters, m, k, v. The final letter, hey. I don't know if you know, people can look like hey is like this, okay, with a little dot. You want to change it to makom. You don't have to erase anything, okay? You just add pak, pak, that's it. You add two squiggly lines. You have mikveh turns into makom. Mikveh is a priestly thing, water, priestly Persian element, okay? It was holy for Persians. They are trying to erase basically the priestliness wherever they can without deleting anything. So when they don't have to delete anything, they're like a little line and another little line. And the theory that I have is that they also did that, and I'll end with that, whatever, we won't get into it. They changed the name of the priest to Aharon. Aharon, the name doesn't mean anything. What does it mean? Aharon. It's also very difficult to say Aharon. has no meaning. Nobody even thinks about what's the meaning of Aaron. Why is this a name? Where does it come from? We don't know. I did it, with squiggly lines. Tzadok. He was the important priest for the priests. He was the important ancestor. And all the high priests, they came from Tzadok. They have to come from Tzadok. You can change with the same squiggly lines that I said, mikveh makom, with this. This is hay, okay? Just instead of this, you just add, make it like this. You can change Tzadok to Aharon with squiggly lines, and then you cut off the legitimacy of the priest, the exclusivity of the priest to be high priests when you change the name. And the only thing that I can think of that Aharon could mean is that it is like an anagram, it's called, when you switch the order of the letters, to Ha'aron, the ark. Ha'aron, the ark, Aharon, just switch the first two letters. Where does Deuteronomy say that the 10 commandments were found? They were lost and found. Where? Inside Ha'aron, the ark. Okay? So it's all whatever, a little bit complicated here and there, but the overall picture is not complicated. And I feel like that when every time we discuss these topics, right, it doesn't feel convoluted. The reality doesn't feel convoluted. It's sensible. This is what should lead us. It has to be simple, understandable, has to make sense, not about your ego, not about what you said before, okay? We're curious people, okay? This is what should lead us.
So where can people find your podcast?
So we're right. I give you a link, a pod follow link to the podcast. It will take you to whatever app you're using. And you mentioned earlier that I gave you a link to the Patreon page. It's not like to go to Patreon and support my podcast, because whatever your listeners don't know me. It's just I started a new newsletter, and instead of going through Substack, now it's a completely free newsletter. You can just instead of registering through Substack, you just register for free in Patreon, on Patreon, and then this is where I'm posting my newsletter. And the link is for the first edition. I have two that is connected to Deuteronomy and to what I mentioned about the Yom Kippur being originally the last day of the year. I posted an episode about it earlier in the year, episode 88, whatever. It's linked through this Patreon newsletter. And after that, I found the evidence that I mentioned, that in the Mishnah, it describes Yom Kippur as the day that you pray for an upcoming new year, and also a priest that is not really a priest and does not know how to priest, which matches both of them match the reality of 140 BC. So it's just a link for the newsletter. Everybody can register for free. It's called A Podcast of Biblical Proportions. I go book by book by book by book. I'll be starting my Deuteronomy season, fifth season, on the first Sunday of January, and keep going. Yeah.
As I said earlier, the links to his podcast, all the relevant links will be in the description below, and it will also be in the pinned comment just below that. And that being said, Gil, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. Real pleasure, Jacob. Hope to see you again soon.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.